Let's do it!
MainMan.
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 MainMan. All the people that were working for MainMan were unusual.
We were loud, ugly Americans, basically.
MainMan. An interesting story, a very entertaining story, a very long, wonderful adventure.
Hello and welcome to episode 51 in our series exploring the history of MainMan, the management rights company which was renowned in the 70s for transforming the business of rock and roll. The MainMan philosophy was to provide financial support that enabled their artists full creative freedom.
The biggest positive influence on us here were really the Mark Bolan records that were being made at the time. Those are fine records. It was like he mated Joni Mitchell and Chuck Berry.
The management team pioneered outrageous and often controversial promotions and marketing techniques that soon became the benchmark for the decadence and indulgences that are now part of rock folklore.
Dave and Angie had in their bedroom a sort of a sunken bit like a boxing ring, so you could have an audience sitting around the side and watch what was going on. So they were kind of just wild times, people floating in and out.
MainMan worked with a diverse range of clients that included Lou Reed, Amanda Lear, Mick Ronson, John Mellencamp, Mott the Hoople, Danica Gillespie, Mick Ralphs, Iggy Pop, Marianne Faithfull, and David Bowie.
So I just didn't know where I was going, but I just knew I was writing, and I had in my head that some idea that I wanted to put some kind of musical thing together. I didn't know what it was going to be.
50 years ago, Bowie began the first leg of his UK tour, previewing tracks from the new Ziggy Stardust album. As part of the promotion for the tour, David was interviewed by Melody Maker's Michael Watts and photographed by Barrie Wentzell. This was the first time anyone had seen Bowie in his new Ziggy persona. Not only was his look markedly different from the previous year, leading up to the release of Hunky Dory, but what Bowie had to say also made headlines, declaring to Watts, "I'm gay and always have been." Barrie Wentzell's photograph of Bowie featured on the front cover of Melody Maker, introducing the world to Ziggy Stardust. 50 years later, Barrie is still surprised at how much attention that Melody Maker article continues to attract. Now living in Toronto, I caught up with Barrie, who began by recalling his meeting with David in January of 1972.
Well, I remember it was a bit like it is here in Toronto, a sort of coldish, darkish day, and we went into the MainMan office, and I knew it was to let us in, and there's David sitting there reading a book, gets up smiling, and I went, boy, I mean, this is the drabbest office, but the most colourful character in it, you know, because I didn't recognise him and I didn't know him before, but he said hi there, we had a cup of tea and then went through an interview, and I just took pictures as he sat there, and that was it, you know. I didn't think too much about it until it came out in the paper, and then the next day I was shooting, I think, Tony Stratton-Smith and Charisma and Genesis or whatever. It was just another day in a sense, but a very bright one. I mean, at that point it was very unisex, I guess, because he did turn up at the Melody Maker office, I think a year before, in a dress. and the reporter took him down to the Old Red Lion, our local drinking place. But we expected weird characters. It was rock and roll, and but he was like it wasn't anything I'd seen before. It was like a space figure or some character out of a sci-fi novel, and I thought that was really fabulous, you know, very visual and great to take pictures of. So thank you, David, for dressing up for us.
Over the next few months, it became evident to fans and journalists that David was inhabiting this new character. Did he make it obvious that this was all part of a new act to you?
He seemed to be posing the whole time. The whole thing was a pose. I thought it was a put-on. But he was playing a character, a role, and that was interesting. Who was this character? And I was just amazed, really. But it was the music, you know, the Hunky Dory album, great. I do remember, wasn't it, Peter Noon did a version about Pretty Things? Oh, you pretty thing. But...
You said you'd seen David around Soho a bit back in the day, so you were used to colourful characters. It's pretty anodyne around Soho these days. What was it like back when you were living and working there in the 60s and 70s?
Well, the first job I had was probably around 1960 in a strange place in Greek Street called Manhattan Displays, and the artist there was later to be legendary, Quentin Crisp, who was unknown at the time, who... had some hennaed purplish hair and wore leotards and bare feet. But he was an amazing character. There were a lot of other characters. A lot of his friends used to drop by. The studio we had where I worked was more like a soiree of a French left bank cafe, and we had artists, strippers, artist models, Covent Garden porters, Mrs. Crisp's friends, and so I'd sort of seen and all around there were weird and strange characters you couldn't quite define, but I guess that was Soho in 1960. It was a village in the middle of London, which was special. I mean, it was affordable, I guess. A lot of musicians lived there, all the film companies were there, recording studios, within walking distance of most everything, There was such a lot going on there. You walk down the street and, oh, hey man, how you doing? You just knew people, and for me it was like walk down the street, ran into Richie Blackmore. I said, oh man, I love that picture you took of I went, oh no, thanks man, how you doing? And another day I was in Bourne and Hollingsworth, and Ray Davies is in there buying cutlery with his missus and going, oh god. And then I was walking down Lower Water Street one day, and this guy comes up screaming, "Here, Wentzell, what the fuck is all this going on here?" And it's Jimmy Page, and he's clutching a load of Aleister Crowley magazines or whatever, pointing out the back page of the Melody Maker, where there's a little criticism, about a paragraph of the Led Zeppelin gig in Belfast I was at. He said, "Hey, you were there, it was great, wasn't it?" I said, "Yeah, it was on the front page." I said, "What's this?" I said, "Well, it's just a knocking little article. A reader's didn't like it or something, but you have to understand, the paper can't be just saying great things. We have a reader's mailbag, and everybody can say what they want, and you've got to have a balance." I said, "Well, don't talk to me. Get Peter Grant to speak to Ray Coleman. It's nothing to do with us. And by the way, how are you doing?" He said, "Well, I just bought this house in Scotland, Aleister Crowley's house." But he said, "Nobody wants to come and stay there." I go, "Jimmy, really?" It's a colourful time, especially after World War II, which wasn't that colourful,
That Soho that you described became the epicentre of the 50s and the 60s music scene. How did you get to be part of it?
Well, last day at school, I think I was 15 or 16 or something. We in the science room, I think we had a free period before we left school. Finally, school's over forever, as Alice Cooper would say. But some of the girls brought some 78 records, and they played Elvis Presley, Heartbreak Hotel, Fats Domino, Ain't That a Shame, and Great Balls of Fire by Jerry Lee Lewis. And I went, wow, things ain't ever going to be the same after that. And hey, what are you going to do? And I went, well, something to do with that was the intent, And somehow I went to art school, where I ran into all the other waifs and strays and odd characters who were dressed like Juliet Greco or Vincent van Gogh, because we didn't have a youth culture until we started making it up ourselves, in fashion, dress, style, music, art, and all of that. So it was homemade by local yobs, basically. I ran into a lot of, Pete Townsend, Clapton, Ron Wood, John Lennon. A lot of people went to art school too. It was a default place where you didn't know what you were going to do. Oh, go to art school. And out of that came a lot of incredible stuff, some of the people I used to go to at art school I'd run into, they were running advertising agencies and driving Rolls Royces later. All my other friends were working in factories. So it was like take a chance, But it was perfect timing because, we had Lonnie Donegan and all that, and Cliff Richard, and when we heard the American music, which they weren't even listening to in the States, and Mick Jagger and Keith Richard had got Muddy Water albums, and nobody had heard of them, and it was like, thanks to Dobell's record shop in Charing Cross Road, you could find... It was a search to find, wow, the music, and to try to learn how to play, because nobody knew how to play a guitar if you could find one. It was only Bert Whedon's Playing a Day book, which saved a lot of people, because Mark Bolan said, "Here, I've got this book, Playing a Day. Oh, I've learned how to do it." Yeah. So it was starting off from nothing and then becoming all of that, which is now, as you know, history.
In that early rock and roll scene with all those colourful characters, I guess it wasn't such an outrageous statement for you when David declared that he was gay.
Well, there were a lot of gay managers and characters around. I guess Mr. Crisp was an obvious example, but and it was underground and against the law, I guess. But I think Bowie's statement really sort of helped a lot of people, I guess. You know, Mick Watts seemed a bit shocked, but I'm going, oh, no, he's a put-on. No, he's not. But it doesn't matter, you know. It's like, it's a person as a person. We didn't have prejudices about people, black, green, yellow, planet, whatever. We as a culture, our little culture together was assuming and looking at all aspects of, hey, what can you bring to the table? Oh, you've got a sitar, you've got that. Oh, it was sharing of everything. We were sort of, there was no barriers or to anything. It was like freedom, because we were youth and we had broken the bounds of that, and we didn't know what we were going to do, but we weren't going to do that, you know, go back to the repressiveness. It's open-mindedness, and the youth seemed to dig it, whether the older folks did or not. Because remember, there's a couple of policemen standing outside the gig, and I came out and said, "What do you think of Mark Bolan?" "Oh, it's okay, my daughter likes him, but I'm not too sure about the music." You know, it was us against them, no. But that's what youth does. It rebels against authority and tries to find its own way and make a new world rather than, oh, can't have that, you know. Everybody was different. There wasn't anybody like anybody else. That was the amazing thing. There was no band that was, oh, you sound like that. The Stones were different from the Beatles. The Kinks were different from the Mark Bolan was. Everybody was different, and Bowie was certainly different. He brought in a new, more of an Andy Warhol, Lou Reedy sort of feel to England. He brought America to England in a sense which we didn't know about, the underground, and, you know, the early Patti Smith and Lenny Kaye and Velvet Underground. It was like, what are they doing out there? This is bizarre. I mean, they all seem to be dressed up or in some other time thing. And all the Americans who came to London, they were interested in the English scene. We were interested in the LA scene and the New York scene. So there was a lot of cross-pollination of ideas and influences. It was like, well, people couldn't understand it maybe, but it was too complex or too simple. I don't know, but it was different. I don't know how other people took it. To me, it was just David Bowie dressed in this fantastic outfit. And saying he's gay, well, so what, you know? What's the problem?
So when you photographed David in DeFree's office, what was the process in those analogue days for getting your photos and Michael's article into Melody Maker that week?
I think I walked back to my flat in Soho on Dean Street, and if I'd been shooting other things, I'd wait and develop it all at once or in a couple of stages. So that took time. I know digital, it's instant now, but and dry them off, then print them, and then take them around to Fleet Street to the Melody Maker office and drop in. But I think I only shot it. At some things I shoot just one roll of film. Others it was depending on whatever, 4 or 5 sort of roles, and I'd pick out maybe 1 or 2 pictures. Briefly, I didn't do contacts. I just went, oh, that looks interesting. So it was a spontaneous choice of using the pictures. I don't know how I did that, but the picture either speak to you and say, oh, that works, me, or else it didn't, and that's how I did it. It was no time to think or reflect or to ponder or scratch your head, you know. Monday was press day, where all the pictures had to be in. Most gigs over the weekend, so I was working all weekend to get stuff into the prints into the Melody Maker on Monday before the train went off to Colchester, where it got printed on Tuesday. It appeared on the newsstands on Wednesday. We had a conference at midday planned the next week, so there was. We only looked back at the weeks what we'd done and go, oh, that's interesting. I never had time to read it. I don't think I read Mick's article because I was onto something else. But now, looking back, we were incredibly busy. You know, there was so much to cover.
With so many exciting new bands, all with individual styles, how did you approach a subject when setting up a shoot?
I guess it's Zen in the art of photography. You can't think about it; it just happens. And like the whole thing is to focus on the eyes. If the eyes are sharp and you're looking into the eyes, you see that, and everything else can be out of focus. But if the eyes are not, if you haven't got the eyes, then you can't do it. So it was like, what's the situation like? Do I need the lighting? I usually took a little flash, portable flash, bounce it off the ceiling, or a little umbrella. And I guess the exposure, I never took an exposure reading, but somehow it nearly always came out. So it was perchancey. And what's the best lens to use? I think I used a 50mm regular lens, which I really didn't use. 28 was usually what I did. But it was like, no, okay, that's how it's going to be. And because the Melody Maker front page or whatever, you knew, oh, they're going to do that or that, so you'd make allowances and try and get a picture which fitted any type that they put in so it didn't screw up your picture. So there's a lot of things to think about, but I didn't think about that. It was, don't think, just do. And that was the same with live gigs. When I did photograph Bowie at Earl's Court, and it was like the automatic pilot, you know. Oh, okay, yeah, click, and this little click finger had a mind of its own. I didn't have to do anything, just let go and be with that. And that's what that facility, a lot of musicians told me later, like Bowie actually said, well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how you did that, but thanks for that picture you did, all those pictures for the article with Mick Watts. It really made me, or Ziggy, and thanks a million, you know. So it was a nice compliment to hear back that the actual artist likes what you do, you know. He was an animated character. It was what role is he playing now? What movement is he going through? It was very, that Lindsay Kemp school of drama and stage presentation. And that's what really the Melody Maker was using. It was like, oh, it's got to be visual, because before that they just used stock pictures of them. And we were the first ones to actually cover a live gig with pictures and interviews with pictures. The NME wasn't doing that, or nobody else. I was doing it because I wanted to, and it really helped the journalists when we went to see Eric Clapton or Jimi Hendrix or anybody, to sit down, have a cup of tea, and I wouldn't take pictures for the first 10 minutes, but you know, we'd have a chat and and then I'd gradually take out the camera, put some film in, point it at somewhere else and click and put it down again. So it was learning that Don Pennybacker style of being a fly on the wall, or just calming things down and not, here, do this, do that, I want this and that, which was a style before. So I was very undirected. I tried to capture people in their best light, because that was the art of photography. You know, my heroes were Cartier-Bresson, Eugene Smith, Dorothy Lange, and all of the great photographers. So I was trying to make pictures, and it didn't really matter who was in it somehow to me, because they changed every day. But you know, some people did stand out. David Bowie certainly stood out, and that Ziggy was a bit of a short-lived thing. I thought he based it on Vince Taylor, who did Big Black Cadillac, who started dressing up in black leather and all that, was famous in France, but rose and fell and became a baggage handler, I think, at the end of his life. But a bit like Gilbert and George, I guess, like he's an art piece in himself. That was wonderful, and styled and dressed by these great artists. He was wearing art and expressing it. That's what more can you do? Brilliant. As old Keats said, a thing of beauty is a joy forever. I never looked at it that way, but looking back at those pictures 50 years ago, which I'm putting in my book, I go, oh, that still works as a photograph. Oh, that's fantastic. It wasn't just, it didn't date. We had a lot of fun. It was experimental, and the artists were learning how to play their instruments and come up with tunes. I was learning how to do photography, and it was a magic moment. I think you can't do that now, unfortunately, and there isn't There doesn't seem to be any equivalent to what we had. But if David hadn't have done that interview and dressed up like that, probably nothing would have happened, you know.
Another very famous series of shots of yours that were taken the following year in May in Paris when David and Angie and some of the Ziggy entourage were returning from the Japanese tour. How did that session come about?
Well, Lorenzo had the bright idea of us, as MainMan wasn't cooperating, to go to Paris, Roy Hollingsworth and I from the Melody Maker, meet David Bowie and come back on the train with them on the boat. Sounds a great idea. They put us up in the Georges V Hotel, which was pricey and still is probably. But he didn't turn up the day we got there, or the next day, or even, I think, the next day. And we were pretty skint. We'd spent all our money. And we finally took a chance on going to the Gare du Nord. And as we got there, we saw this... it's David Bowie. Hey boys, hey, where you are? And he just arrived a few days late. And Angie said, well, David, we've missed the boat. And the next train was connecting with a hovercraft. So he was a bit apprehensive about that until we explained it only flew a foot off the sea and it was quite safe. Anyway, we get on the train and realise we don't have any money. And Dave says, don't worry, I'll fix that, and he pays for us all the way back to London. But as he was saying late, as I mentioned earlier, he said, thanks for the article you did, it really made me wow, all of that, and I guess it was a nice payment back. But we had a great trip back to London, and the hovercraft was a bit chancy, but he did get on, and so maybe that was the first time he'd flown.
A quick question for you about Angie. She was in the office for that first Ziggy session and was an important part of the team. How did you view her involvement in David's career?
Well, if David was sort of androgynous, Angie was sort of that, but New Yorkish and a lot more assertive, in a sense, because she was the one that seemed to be organising all of us on the train to get back to London from Paris. And it was like, New York chicks, they get stuff done, but they can be trouble, and shut up. But funny enough, in one of the pictures, I think there was a front page, of him and Bowie and Angie hugging each other in the station. It was used on the front page, and MainMan said, David and Angie would love a copy of that picture. After being banned for taking pictures, now they wanted a picture of them. But I don't think they ever sent it in, and I think it ended up they got divorced later, so probably just as well,
Photographer Barrie Wentzell recalling some of his now legendary sessions with David Bowie during the early Ziggy Stardust period. And you can check out all of Barry's photographs from many of rock's iconic figures at barriewentzell.com. And there are some great pieces of MainMan archive referencing the early Ziggy period that are available on the MainMan label website, part of an ever-growing collection of MainMan documents, including articles, telexes, letters and production notes, a lot of them never seen before, that we're adding to the MainMan label website each week. That's a great record of a very exciting period in rock history. That's at mainmanlabel.com. And on the website, you can also check out the other episodes in the MainMan series. I'm Des Shaw, and this is a Zinc Media Tech production. Thanks for listening.